Well, good afternoon and welcome to the second episode of Tech Talks DC happening on www.cyberexchange.ca. My name is Ali Hirji, working and leading the AI Hub and the Center for Cybersecurity Innovation at Durham College. Now, for those of you who don't know, it's 2021. Time seems to have kind of stopped and our years are kind of a little bit all over the place given the reality and the new normal that we live in. It's 2021 and this marks the 60th anniversary of the password. Speaking of anniversaries, it's about 11 years for me in Canada. So I'm about 11 years old, going on 12 in terms of Canadian years. And I remember when I came to Canada, my first experience with setting up a corporate password. So let me tell you how this scenario worked out. Now, I grew up in Dubai, predominantly a cash-based society, and credit cards were rearing their appearances, especially for those who were quite young. You were able to get a credit card, but it wasn't commonplace. But when I came to Canada for the 2007 academic year, I had to go by myself to a bank. And when I went to the bank, I had to set up an account. And getting a card, a debit card, was the rule of thumb, not something that I was used to. So I obviously asked a lot of questions. Without naming the bank, the teller was a fine individual who told me, Ali, let me help you set your banking card up, and took me to the ATM machine and put the card in and said, choose a password. Now, had this individual stopped there, I think my suspicion on passwords would have probably ended. But the individual went on to say, choose a password, like a date of birth, maybe your student number, maybe your cell phone number, something that's easy to remember, but nobody else can really guess. From 2007 until now, it's very easy for people to find out with a little bit of social engineering what my password could have been, because date of births are almost everywhere. In fact, I saw a post this morning where a really well-known cybersecurity and privacy expert said, I wonder why LinkedIn now wants to know my date of birth as well and is encouraging me to share it. Passwords have been around for a very, very long time. But as today's session is going to digest through, there's a need for passwords not only to change, but completely be eradicated. Now, all of you who are deep in the depths of password management would know some of the issues are not just around the social engineering realities of passwords, but also the fact that centrally managed systems, also the fact that public tokens, etc., are all vulnerable in some shape or fashion. With the growth of remote work, with the increasing reliance on cell phones, with the growth in social engineering attacks, with the growth of social phishing attacks included, I see about 3 million new types of attacks being launched on a daily basis. Where does the password stand in this cosmos? And as the session for today is titled, can we actually imagine a passwordless society? So with that, drawing on 12 years of experiences writing different kinds of passwords and attempting to remember it, somewhere there is a brain in me, I assure you. Today's discussion is with two experts who have taken on the challenge to assist everybody in going passwordless, one user and one institution at a time. So please join me in welcoming Ketan Kapadia and Mike from Bloksec. And I'm going to turn it over to them to introduce themselves very quickly and tell us one mission statement that they hold true to themselves. Ketan, let's start off with you. Welcome to Tech Talks DC.
Thanks, Ali. And again, I want to thank everybody for joining us during their lunch hour. So just a little bit of introduction about me. Been in the cyberspace since around 2000 with a focus on identity and access management when it was not even really called identity and access management in the early 2000s. And obviously over the years, have been involved in many projects, deployments, in an advisory type role for many institutions, including the large banks in Canada and Europe, and also involved in some conversations and investigations from a breach perspective. And a lot of these issues sort of boil back down to sort of the systemic challenge of passwords, right? If we look at some key statistics, just approximately about 1 million people join the internet on a daily basis. This is on a most recent report that was published by World Economic Forum. So obviously all of these people are in some shape and form connecting digitally into the world. And all this sort of ties back to you as a user subscribing to digital services, which is sort of tied to passwords. So obviously for us, we're really on a mission to say, how can we move away from passwords and really provide something more simple and secure from an end user perspective and really help simplify that overall process. So again, I don't want to go into the deep weeds over here, and I'm going to hand it over to Mike for a quick introduction there.
Absolutely. And I will comment just for the audience who's watching on cyberexchange.ca, there are these little ticker notes that are going through the bottom, and you'll notice one of them that says, and it's taken from a Bloksec report, which I encourage you to download from their website, where 81% of attacks that they've found in their studies are owed to compromised passwords. So there's something there, and we'll dive deeper into that. Mr. Mike, it's always been a pleasure engaging with you. This is the first time I'm having you on a panel discussion. Mike, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about why this subject is important to you. Mike.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ali. And thank you, Ketan. It is actually it's not only my first time being on a panel with you, it's my first time being on any panel. So please be patient with me today as I break my first time. So my name is Mike Gillan. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Bloksec. Like Ketan, I've been in the industry for 20 plus years. Actually, he and I, interesting story, joined Sun Life Financial as summer students in the late 90s. I think it was 1998. We met there. And so we've been friends and working together ever since, off and on. At Sun Life,
so we seem to be Ketan,
which was a big advancement at the time. Am I back? Is my bandwidth not great?
Yeah, you're back now.
Apologies.
You're sort of coming back into civilization. You can continue.
Okay, I'll cross my fingers. So as I was saying, Ketan and I worked together since 2000, where we were setting up single sign-on systems for Sun Life, and I've continued to be interested in security and access control systems ever since. And I've developed products for companies. I've led engineering teams, and most recently I was helping architect some solutions for Canada's largest retailer, a 3-year roadmap for identity and access management, where interestingly they're looking to move towards passwordless solutions. So even some of Canada's largest companies have this idea of passwordless on the radar, and I think as we move towards out of this pandemic time and back to the workplace, I think a lot of focus has been put on the way we authenticate and access our systems and how to make that easier, but also how to keep it secure. So you asked for the mission statement and how this kind of came to be. I went through a personal health challenge. I'm a survivor of cancer, as you know, Ali, we've discussed in the past. And when I was there in the hospital, I witnessed nurses with a lot of frustration accessing their systems, either complaining to one another that they were having trouble, they'd forgotten their passwords. It was slowing them down. One nurse I chatted with, because they would always ask me, "What do you do?" And I explained, in layman's terms, I help people with getting access to their systems. And she'd say, "Oh, look, here," she pulled out a little notebook and said, "Oh, look at my notebook." And she flipped it open, and she had 3 or 4 pages just full of usernames and passwords. She had so many usernames and passwords to remember that she had to keep a little notebook in her pocket. And I thought, these people have such an important job. They're saving people's lives, but instead they have to be slowed down by this mundane thing, these passwords that they have to remember, they forget, they have to call the help desk. And we could be doing better. So I kind of made it my mission at that point. I want to revolutionize the way that we log into our systems, not just at work, but just across the board, to make it easier for all of us to access the systems that we use every day, because this is part of our life now. And we're not robots. We can't remember 90 passwords to 90 different accounts.
Absolutely. And I think, thank you for not only giving us a professional perspective on this, but also opening up from a personal standpoint. I think when the first time we spoke about your journey, we made mention of the fact that when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And in that moment, when you're battling through cancer, to even notice those things and to come back with a mission statement to address it, I think is not just a testimony to your own tenacity, but also the team that you've built with Ketan. And I want to thank you as well for supporting some of the work at Durham College. I know that Bloksec is a sponsor of Enable AI, but more importantly, you're also looking now doing some projects with us, and you've spoken to many of our clients around going passwordless. So thank you for your tenacity and your perseverance. Brilliant introductions from both of you. And now I want to jump into the aspects of what do we mean when we talk about going passwordless? Ketan, let's start off with you. In fact, a question did come into me directly message, and I'll massage that into this conversation. And if you remember, Ketan, in my introduction, I spoke about this aspect about how passwords are currently stored centrally. And no matter in some shape or fashion, whoever the provider is of your service, even though they may hash that password or not save it in plain text, by it being stored centrally, two things can happen. Number one, it is a single vault of attack, but number two, someone somewhere within that organization can still see the password. Can you help our audience understand why centralized systems are particularly painful to you when thinking about access management? Ketan.
And I think great question, right? So I think, when we, going back to, if we kind of understand the whole concept of how passwords sort of came into play 60 years ago, I'm not going to go into the history there, but really, it was really created to allow people to access, a time sharing system on a platform, right? And we kind of sort of took that and kind of built on top of that over the years, right? So really, as we started adopting passwords into our common day activities, as more and more services came online, all the organizations, obviously today, the concept of centralization, right? So all the passwords, all the credentials that, whether we use, from a corporate perspective or from a retail or a consumer perspective, all of those things are stored centrally. And really, that centralization is really a honeypot for the malicious attackers, right? Because once I sort of break into that system, either through malware or, even if it is some sort of a ransomware, I still have access to the data. And regardless of whether it is a plain text password or some sort of a hash password, it is relatively easy for these malicious hackers to sort of take this encrypted password hashes and still try to do a brute force attack with it, right? There's this concept of rainbow tables that exist out there. So I can, through AWS now, which makes computing power so easy, I can spin up a whole bunch of VMs and basically take the rainbow tables and start going through those encrypted passwords and sort of find a match. And then I can sort of take that and sort of, perform those brute force attacks, right? So this is why the whole centralization aspect is becoming a big of a challenge for everybody in the sense that you now become a target, and the malicious actors they basically want to take that information and either sell it on dark web or sort of take that data and further infiltrate into the organization and either walk away with some IP or plant some additional seeds from a ransomware or malware perspective, right? So obviously, we need to sort of move away from that concept of centralizing those passwords and giving it back to the onus of you as a user who sort of own that identity, and sort of you also owning sort of the key to that kingdom versus giving, the keys to someone else to hold it for you, right? And I think that's the model we sort of need to move away from. What we say is moving away from a centralized to a decentralized model there.
Ketan, wonderful explanation of how the whole centrality of the system works. So I'll think back to, just because we've got quite a few folks who are probably even new to identity access management and probably just haven't even thought of a world without passwords. Back home, and this was specifically in Dubai, I remember this thing when, let's say, if I would be coming home late, I would have gone for tuition, or I was at the library studying late. And if I was coming home, often what would happen is my mom would put the key under the carpet. And who's going to look under the carpet, right? Like, nobody's going to come under there. And this was sort of that metaphorical example that I wanted to use in terms of understanding the centralized systems at the end of the day. One of the stats that are here on your website talks about 3 million odd attacks, that brute force attacks, that can be initiated every minute in order to determine passwords in a centralized system. This is that metaphorical example of putting the key under the carpet. You just have to get lucky once, and you're going to find that key, and you've got into one account, which can spiral into a whole bunch of others. Now, Ketan, I do want to come back to the resistance to shift from centralized accounts. But Mike, I want to bring you into this conversation. You've been technically very deep in this program. You've been very deep in the development of Bloksec and this decentralized model. Can you help our audience understand a little bit about how machine learning algorithms and how the infinite power of compute is sort of being run to launch brute force attacks to get some of these passwords from this centralized system? Can you give us a little bit of a lay of the land, Mike?
Yeah, of course. If you're familiar with Bitcoin mining, I'll bring Bitcoin mining into this a little bit, because I think it's interesting. Bitcoin operates on the concept of hashing, very, very much like passwords are encrypted and stored centrally using hashing or encryption. So Bitcoin mining has given rise to very specialized hardware that is able to perform a lot of hashes per second. I've recently upgraded my own machine with a video card that's capable of operating 110 million hashes per second. So to put that in perspective for the audience, if I have a password that's 8 characters long, and I take any hash of that, doesn't matter what algorithm it is, and I put that onto my computer with a program that uses my video card to attack it, it would take my home computer sitting on my desk about 6 minutes to break that password. So it doesn't matter if you've got uppercase letters, lowercase letters, and symbols in your password. Making your password more complex is not going to stop a computer from being able to brute force break it just by trying every single possible combination with millions in a second. It's very simple. So then what companies are doing is they'll ask you to create a longer password. I will say that is much better. And I would say if we're not yet at the passwordless place, if you want to keep yourself safer online, a much better password would be a long phrase, something that's easy for you to remember, but longer. Like, many hands make light work, for example. It's something that's very easy to remember, but it's a long phrase, and it would take exponentially longer to break that. That might take a year or two for a computer to be able to crack. So longer is better. But the problem, as Ketan alluded to, is this centralization of passwords means that if somebody gets access to that vault of passwords, once they crack one of them, they're able to figure out what the encryption algorithm is, and then they're able to break all of the rest of them. The other facet I'd like to bring into the centralization is one of privacy. We are seeing a lot of people using services like Google and LinkedIn and Facebook to act as a proxy for logging into other services. So I'm sure you've logged into a restaurant site, for example. It says, hey, you don't have to sign up. You can just sign in with your Google account. So that's a good way to alleviate the problem of passwords, and it's an advancement over having a single password for every site. But it does bring up a bit of a security a privacy issue, in that you've now essentially made a connection between your Google account and that website that you've used. So Google knows that you're using that. And so Google's providing this service for free. You can sign into other sites of Google, but an easy shorthand is if something is free, if a service is free, it means that the product is you. And so Google is using that information to sell you more products, and Facebook is using that information to collect more data on you. So again, it's a form of centralization by using these social authentication services that we think, as sort of the underlying principle of Bloksec is not to go with that type of centralization, but to facilitate having separate credentials for all the different sites, but to make it easy for the user.
Yeah, I think, that aspect of understanding the user experience is extremely important. And there's nothing without design. There's either good design or bad design. And you spend quite an immense amount of time understanding design. One of the comments that I see in the chat is someone mentioned, and then there is quantum. So to our audience, for those of you who are not familiar with quantum computing, I highly recommend July 12th to July 16th. I think it's a firm called IronCap that's going to be doing something on quantum computing and basically encryption related to quantum computing. Highly recommend you watch that session. But Mike, I also agree with you. One of my mentors once said, nothing is secure. Everything is running on trust and verification. I want to build on that trust and verification piece, and Ketan, bring you into this conversation. Mike brought up this really interesting, and I know we're sort of veering away from script, but so many different interesting things are coming up. So I'm going to go with the flow and roll with the punches. Ketan, back to you. And this trust but verify thing, and making it easy. We don't have to remember all of these passwords. We don't have to note it down somewhere, etc. But what do you do when it comes to these single sign-on like mechanisms? It's very convenient, very easy, and there's this trust that people may have that it's Google driven. So for example, I don't mean to pinpoint at them specifically, but it's Google driven. It must be secure, it must be safe. I know a couple of years ago, Facebook was found to be storing a lot of passwords in plain text. Do you think single sign-on as well, when it comes to passwords, is something we need to eliminate? Or is the concept of single sign-on something that we can learn from, but still go passwordless? Ketan?
No, so that's a great topic. And I think, again, I think in sort of the identity and access management industry, I think there's always this debate of SSO versus no SSO, the benefits, pros, cons, and and all that good stuff. But I think if you look at the birth of single sign-on really came due to obviously it kind of came within the enterprise world, right? Me now as a user sitting at an institution where I work, I have so many different accounts that I need to log into. How can we simplify that experience from a login perspective? So when I log into my Active Directory with my password, now I can access my Workday, I can access my Salesforce and all those things, right? So I think if we kind of look at the concept of single sign-on, was to really simplify that login process within that confined world, which kind of makes sense, right? So if I'm sitting within four walls in a confined perimeter, then everything's good. But fast forward, we've kind of moved away from the traditional box of perimeter, right? Like we are no longer in this world where everything sits in a data center. All of our services are, either SaaS platform, or organizations are moving towards this digitalization and adopting, cloud services. So you are now breaking these perimeters, and is single sign-on still effective? I think the answer is yes, it is effective from a user experience perspective, but there may be also some drawbacks with that in the sense that if my password or credential somehow got compromised, and if I can log into that single sign-on portal, then guess what? Now I can access every single service that I have as a user, right? So I think there is that element of it. Now, when you look at things from a consumer side of things, where I sort of log in with my Facebook, Google, and so forth, again, it's that whole convenience factor, right? So yes, I don't have to yet go and sign up for another account. I can now just log in with my Google or Gmail account, and yes, it's great, but I think from an end user perspective, I think part of it is that education element, right? Like, let's say if I'm going to sign up for cbc.com, fine, you can use my Google account, but I'm not going to use my Google account to sign into some subscription service which houses a lot of my personal data or my online banking, right? So I think so I think to answer your question there, right, I think it's a sort of finding the right balance, and I would say that single sign-on was introduced to kind of relieve that effect on too many passwords. But I think it also exposes other elements from an end user perspective, from a security perspective, from a privacy perspective, where I think people need to understand what are the complications of it, right? Because, on a daily basis, hundreds of Gmail accounts get compromised. So if now my Gmail account is compromised and if it is linked with other services, guess what? I am pretty much done at that point in time, right? So I think this is where organizations and individuals sort of need to understand as to what is it that they're giving away by leveraging these social logins, and sort of what is the impact to them at a personal level, but also from a privacy perspective, the challenges that you may not necessarily know how your data is being used and what is it being used for.
And I think this aspect, a lot of people are hearing different concepts. I've seen more chatter in the chat where people are saying, well, longer phrase passwords could be better, and just changing your password, good password hygiene. Lots of key terms being thrown, but I think the key word there is the pronoun you. And I want to work with that just a little bit and remind our audience that it's not like Ketan and Mike just came into the world of identity access management and said that to the password. There were experiences that they went through, including technical implementations that got them to go down this rally cry, which is we need to get rid of the password. Now, Mike, I want to bring you into this because you spoke quite a lot, especially in your blogs on Bloksec, about your experiences, for example, with SAML authentication. Now, I believe in its second iteration or something to that effect. And you've actually called those sort of authentication mechanisms out where these federated identity-like models still don't quite cut it for you. Can you give the audience a little bit of a background into why you've written on SAML authentication and why that too doesn't sort of suffice for you when it comes to proper and secure and private access management credentialing? Mike?
Yeah, sure. The SAML and OpenID Connect, which is the sort of the newer iteration of that federation protocol. Again, I don't want to say that they're bad. Like you said, I'm not coming here and saying death to these. They're certainly very useful. And what SAML does for the audience to understand is, like we talked about, Ketan was talking about being inside the perimeter of a company and having a single password that you can use to access all the accounts in that company. What SAML does, it stands for Security Assertion Markup Language. It establishes a way for companies to communicate with one another, setting up essentially a form of trust. So I thought, Ali, it was very apropos that you brought up, trust but verify. So what SAML does is it sets that trust up ahead of time. And so company A can say, I work and do business with company B. I've looked at company B's security practices, and I know that they do a good job of securing their systems and authenticating their users. So if company B sends a user to me and says, I know who this is and I trust that this is Ali, I don't need to verify. I'm just going to trust. And so that's what that assertion in the security assertion markup language is. The authentication comes back to company A with an assertion from company B saying, I trust that this is Ali. So that's great, right? So that was a great advancement in that it allowed that one login from company B to be used inside company A. So we're now expanding kind of the perimeter of that single sign-on. The issue, though, is that with SAML, there's a lot of data being exchanged between company A and company B that Ali's not aware of when he's doing that authentication. They can literally send the entirety of your identity, all of the information that they know about you, through a back channel. And so if you're in a business and corporate environment, that's probably not a big deal. But if you're a consumer using a service, you probably are wanting to know where your information is being stored and where it's being shared. OpenID was a later standard that was introduced. It's based on OAuth, and OAuth was originally created by Twitter as a way for machines to communicate between each other. But it was later extended to be used for people. The difference between SAML and OpenID is that OpenID actually has to ask you first. And so if you're logging in for the first time, everybody's familiar with this type of a screen where it says, hey, they want Facebook wants to be able to, see your email address, see your first name and last name, and then whatever other, they call them claims, that they're asking for. So they want to be able to post to your wall for you. They want to be able to see your friends list. You have to ask for permission first.
Yeah. So
that's a big improvement, and it's much better. So I'm not saying that I don't like OpenID. I think it is a good protocol, and in fact, under the covers, we use OpenID because it's a good way for systems to be able to communicate with one another without having to reinvent the wheel. It's a good protocol. The beef I have with it is more around the fact that you're still putting your trust as a consumer in that one organization. I don't have any control when I give my information to Google, and then Google authenticates me. I don't have any control over what Google does with the fact that they've now seen me authenticate to that other service. And so, and I have a hard time being able to revoke it. I can do it; it is possible, but as a security practitioner, I've been able to go in and find in Facebook how to tweak my privacy and security settings. It was very challenging for me. I can't imagine somebody who is not computer savvy, trying to be able to get in there and make those changes. It's not going to be intelligible to them. And so, and I truly believe that companies make it difficult on purpose, because it's to their advantage to have as much of your information as possible. They're not interested in privacy. They're interested in gathering data.
Absolutely. And you know what, I certainly agree with you. I mean, you've been very diplomatic in your response. And I think the beef that you mentioned with sound authentication ultimately comes down to transparency and how much the user actually knows. There are different theories out there about how much does the user really care to know, but we could probably leave that conversation for another day. But thank you for really emphasizing this piece. I know we've got the right roads in place, we've got the right signs in place, but perhaps we need to be rethinking what's actually being used on these roads, the types of cars, the types of mobility that we're driving in these environments, because that too can cause us to get into some pretty dangerous scenarios. So thank you for that, Mike. Now, Ketan, I want to come back to you. Is that, we've painted this environment where, look, there's the social element of passwords and password sharing and password remembrance that are all vulnerable to some sort of a leak. We've also talked about some of the processes that exist to manage some of these passwords. You've noticed an opportunity. You probably didn't see a lot of people going down this path. So you built a door and you started to knock on this door and started telling people there's an opportunity to rethink how we manage access management. And you went down the path of Bloksec. Ketan, can you tell us a little bit about what's the central premise of how Bloksec enables passwordless authentication? And then I want to go to Mike and sort of work with that and understand it from a perspective of MFA and other perspectives as well. Ketan, over to you.
Yeah, that's great. So I'll kind of give the business view side of things, and I'll let Mike chime in on some of the nitty-gritty details there, right? But really for us, going back to your initial statement, like, kind of what's the mission, what's the vision, really for us is, we want to make, the ability to remove passwords from our daily interactions, right? So eradicate passwords. And really the part of that mission is to part of the mission was to how do we effectively drive that, right? So being in this industry for long, seeing all kinds of challenges and issues, and just knowing how we interact with users too, right? And I think this is where it's also bit of an area, right? Because often we see so many different things come out from different organizations, right? Like at one point, NIST kind of said, hey, go and create complex passwords, 12 characters and stuff. But then they also changed some of their policies where changing passwords often is not good enough, right? So we as people, as individuals, like there's so much conflicting information out there around how strong should my password be? What should I do this? And then not every website even supports those standard protocols, for example, right? When it comes to creating passwords and standards. So really for us, we kind of want to create something to say, okay, well, how can we create a solution which, first of all, moves away the centralization of those things, back into the hands of the user. So that's the first thing. And then part of that was to also ensure that, if something does get compromised, then who gets impacted at the end of the day, right? Because I think that's a big piece of the picture, because every day in the news, we see things that, something got exposed and 17 million accounts got, exposed with plain text passwords and stuff like that, right? So we also looked at some of those things as, okay, well, how can we drive these things? So really, when it came to Bloksec, really the goal is to leverage a combination of decentralized authentication model, right? So, it's a combination of your mobile device with a digital key that stays on your mobile device as part of the app. And then as you try to authenticate or log into websites, you are basically providing that decentralized authentication that's coming as part of your mobile device to provide a digital signature to say, yes, this is me. I am trying to log in. I am signing my digital signature. And part of that digital signature process, we're also leveraging elements of distributed ledger behind the scenes to do additional verification of who you say who you are, and then allow you to log into that website. So this way now, at no point in time, I am, entering any passwords, which can be compromised. I am not exchanging any information that can be replayed if someone is listening to that transaction in between, right? And then every time you are providing that digital signature, it is a unique signature, right? So in this way, I cannot take something that you've done 2 hours ago and kind of say, well, I'll take this and retry to initiate a request as Ali again, right? So I think these are some of the things we look to building into the platform. And this is sort of what we, overall at a high level, our goal is to really simplify that overall experience for the user. And, as I like to say is, your authentication is as simple as unlocking your mobile device. So if you can unlock your mobile device with thumbprint or with a Face ID, that's really what your experience looks like when it comes to authentication, leveraging Bloksec. Now I'll punt it over to Mike so he can add a little bit more color to the picture there.
And Mike, before you do that, I mean, the chat is, and there are quite a few direct message questions, but the chat as well. And people have started to tune into the fact that, Bloksec, blockchain, I wonder what the connection is there. Now, blockchain, mathematical proof that something happened. There are a couple of questions that have come from a blockchain perspective. Mike, can you add on to what Ketan said, but also from a blockchain perspective and the decentralization, can you give our audience a bit of a perspective on how you've incorporated principles from there as well into how you're managing access management? Mike?
Sure thing. Well, I think it's great that we're doing this on the 60th anniversary of the password, because if we look at how people 60 years ago were interacting with the mainframe systems, they were using paper punch cards. And so if you can imagine walking into a room with a stack this tall of little paper cards and feeding them into a card reader, in the time between then and now, we now are using, about a week ago, I saw an ad in online. It was a reprint of a magazine from the 1980s. And it was a guy with a table in front of him full of like a camcorder, a VCR, a little, like a Walkman, if people remember what Walkmans are, a boombox, a camera, like a whole table full of gadgets. And the point was that all of those gadgets are now contained in this device that's in our pocket. So from punch cards to this, and yet we're still using the same password technology that was used 60 years ago. And so really 3 things I want to talk about to answer your question in a very long, I'll try not to be too long-winded to cut me off if I start meandering too much. So you asked about blockchain. That's the reason the company is called Bloksec, is because the original idea for how the authentication system would be done in Bloksec came from looking at how financial transactions are authenticated on blockchain networks such as Ethereum and Bitcoin. They're done using a 256-bit private key. And so as Ketan mentioned, he talked about digital signatures. I won't get into the details of digital signatures. Your audience can Google it if they're not familiar, but the core concept of it is I have a private key and there's a matching public key that goes with that I can give out to other people. And when I create a signature with my private key, it can be verified with the public key. And the private key is so unique that it is impossible. Now, I know somebody brought up quantum. We'll set that aside for another day. With quantum computing aside, it's impossible to reproduce that. So it's a very unique. We're providing a proof of possession of that key. And so to begin with, blockchain was sort of the inspiration for the authentication mechanism that's being used. And then the decentralized nature of our system in an earlier incarnation relied upon the Ethereum system. So Ethereum is essentially a decentralized computing system. You can essentially send a program to the Ethereum network, and all the nodes in the computing network will execute your program, and they all arrive to the same result, and that's called a consensus. And you're able to prove through that verified consensus output across many different programs on many different computers that result was not tampered with, right? I'm not explaining this very well, I know, but essentially you can think of it as a computer that operates across the world.
Yep.
And so it's in order to be able to tamper with any of it, you'd have to control more than half of those computers, which is not possible. So those Ethereum transactions are effectively guaranteed to be genuine. So mentioned very early on in his introduction, he's done breach investigations. One of the things that we need to do as security professionals during breach investigations is prove that something happened or did not happen, prove that somebody logged in or something was hacked. It's very difficult to do that, though. Somebody has root access. It's very simple for them to just wipe away the database and all the logs. So what's great about the blockchain is once something is written to the blockchain, it's permanent. It can't be changed. And so one of the things that we do with Bloksec is to leverage that immutable nature of the blockchain to record transaction history, as well as to keep those public keys secure, to make sure that nobody can tamper with or change your public keys. We can talk about some of our competitors like Fido and the way that they store public keys and where, we studied those different implementations as we were developing Bloksec. And, we saw some vulnerabilities there. And so we engineered our system to sort of fill in those shortcomings that we saw. And really blockchain was the answer to that.
Now, Mike, I will tell our audience this, that if for those of you who are interested in getting a demo of the Bloksec environment, just reach out to me perhaps on Cyber Exchange, and I'll be happy to coordinate that between Ketan and Mike. I know a few individuals have mentioned that, but maybe you might even consider doing another session. Ketan, before I come to you, Mike, I want to come back to you because there's a question that's come up directly to you, and this has to do with, I get the public keys aspect, but private keys. My immediate answer would be yes, but I want to get your perspective. Can private keys also be compromised in some manner? Mike?
They can be. And it comes back to me waving my phone up here, right? So, yeah. So what's the tie into the phone and why is it important? Well, everybody has this in their possession at all times. More Americans have smartphones than have driver's licenses. So when we looked at, if we're gonna replace the password with something better, and we chose private keys, like a cryptographic digital signature using private keys, the smartphone is the device that does it for us. We keep the private key on the smartphone. In the iOS implementation in Apple's devices, there's a hardware component called the Secure Enclave. Yeah. The Secure Enclave is a completely separate set of hardware. It's its own chip. Yeah. And it's only accessible, the memory segment that you get allocated to your application is only accessible to your application. So even if somebody is able to compromise your phone, if they do not have your biometric information, they're not going to be able to extract that private key, and so it's secure. Android is a little bit tougher to secure because not all Android devices have that hardware protection. If the device does have the hardware protection, we use it. But then what we've done with Android, because Android can be rooted, which essentially gives you access to the file system, we've chosen to disallow those devices that have been rooted. So if you've rooted your Android device, you're not going to be able to use Bloksec because we've deemed that to be not a secure place to keep your private key. We want to make sure that if you're entrusting us with your digital authentication, we want it to be something that is, as I can't say hack proof, right? Nothing is hack proof, but we want to make it as hack proof as possible.
Absolutely. And again, I think for those of you who are watching, you're seeing the little ticker notes as well. So that gives you more context into this. There were a couple of other realms of thought that I wanted to sort of walk through, but quite a few questions have come in, and we've got about 12 to 13 minutes. So, you've got a bit of a fan following here. I can see almost everyone going, Ketan, my key, and just cheering on, because this is a conversation that hasn't been had on this platform.
I highly doubt that.
and you're calling for some pretty radical thinking to some degree. At least in my books, you are asking people to not just think outside of the box, but burn the box. And one of the things that's come in is around how phones can also be targeted from a perspective of SIM jacking and other ways in which phones can also be taken over. Ketan, in the approach that Bloksec takes, how do you even try to empower users to keep their phones itself as a piece of hardware more protected and more within their purview? Ketan?
Oh, and I think that's a great question, right? So I think, as Mike mentioned, nothing is hack proof, right? But I think with majority of us, with the new devices, with some level of biometric verification does help, right? And then, so obviously putting that from a security perspective, right? I always go back and say, leverage the security features that the phone provides. Now, I know friends who are very, like, I'm not going to use thumbprint, I'm not going to use Face ID and all those things, and I'm going to use some sort of a password to log in, and then that's fine. So I think really at the end of the day, I think as an individual, you need to figure out what's appropriate for you, right? But that I think when it comes to sort of SIM jacking and those capabilities, right? I think some of this sort of goes back to your data exposed previously, someone be able to get that information through social engineering and stuff like that, right? So, at least with the Bloksec implementation, even if you get SIM hijacked, right? Like that digital key stays on the device. Just because you have a SIM hijack doesn't mean that you as a malicious actor are now going to be able to walk away with that digital, with that private key and start acting as Ali, right? So that's something that sort of is secure, that stays on your device. And yes, your device may no longer work as it's supposed to work, but I think that sort of gives you that capability, right? I think when we just look at the overall security aspect of things, right? And again, the device is going to be as secure as it's going to be, right? So for example, if you look at majority of the devices today, I can have my wife's thumbprint or facial recognition enabled on the device so she can access it. So obviously, so there's things she will be able to do on my device. And she may be traced as me interacting with some of those things. So obviously, there are elements of the device as to how the vendors provide. So we kind of work within the confines of that, and we're not going to be able to change some of those elements off it. But I think when it comes to the security of the device overall, I think I would say it's probably a little bit better.
I want to jump in if it's okay.
Yeah,
usually you're ping ponging for us, but I want to jump on the question. I think part of the nature of the question was, how do we protect against something like a SIM swap attack?
Sure.
We can actually help with that, because when you think about how SIM swap attacks happen, somebody calls in to, Bell or Rogers or TELUS and says, hey, I lost my phone. I got a new one. Here's my new SIM card. Can you activate it for me? Can you port my phone number over? And they'll say, okay, let's make sure it's you. Tell me what's your birthday, what's your mother's maiden name, what's your address, what city were you born in, things like that. What's your account number with us? That's essentially a form of identity proofing that's being done by that company. And if you're able to answer those questions successfully, and you're able to convince the human on the other side of the line there that I am Ketan Kapadia, that okay, Mr. Kapadia, I've moved your phone number over to your new SIM card. You're good to go. I can now, do a password reset, get the SMS challenge on my phone, log in as him. How Bloksec can help with that is, instead of just asking those security questions, I can say, oh, Mr. Kapadia, I see you've signed up for our Bloksec service. I'm going to send a push notification to your device, which, by the way, doesn't rely on SMS. Can you confirm through that Bloksec authentication? Because really what you're doing on that phone call is authenticating yourself.
Correct.
Can you provide us with consent, and so that we can do that SIM change for you? And you can say yes with your device. Now you might, and I know I've created a gap in my explanation there, because if I've lost my device, I don't have it. But there is a mechanism through which you can either have your same Bloksec authentication on an iPad or another device in your house, or you can also back up your Bloksec private key and load it onto the new device. So by providing proof of possession, it's much better than those knowledge factors that you're using to authenticate you to the phone system. And so we'd be able to stop that attack even before it happened.
Absolutely. And
Rogers, tell us.
no worries. And speaking of ping ponging, I'm going to keep that metaphor going. I'm going to smash one at your end, because there are 3 questions that have come in, and we have about 6 minutes to go. So probably a bit of rapid fire here, but
rapid fire questions. Let's go.
Let's have some fun with this. So, and I'll read this verbatim for you. It says, what happens if I use a phone and then sell it? I saw this one coming. Will the private key be changed and a new one will be used for the new user? Mr. Mike, you're on the spot.
Very simple. So first of all, you do a backup of our system, and our backup, we're quite proud of it. It uses an encrypted QR code. It doesn't store it in the cloud, because even if you store it to iCloud or Google's cloud, you're still storing that someplace that's could be compromised. So QR code, you print it out, you keep it at home, put it in your fireproof box, keep that secure, right? Sell your phone, you wipe it, you give it to the new person. You get your new phone, you download the app, you take a snap of the QR code, punch in the password you use to encrypt that QR code, so that, should it fall into dastardly hands, that they can't do anything with it. Type in your password, bam, all your accounts are restored. It's like you're still using your old device.
Ketan, I'll take points on this, because we've just discovered a new service under Bloksec, which is how to efficiently sell your phone and securely. And we can help you do that right away. I'll just take a couple of percentage points on that. But a new business line has been discovered. Keeping in line with what was this? Rapid fire. Mike, again, you're on the spot right now. Ketan, you know what? This is
that's okay.
There's
Technical
a question
audience.
for you.
I love it.
But Mike, it's come to you, and I knew this person was going to be on. This person loves and speaks and breathes blockchain. That's all that he talks about. I'll read it verbatim. You, Mike, said that originally you used Ethereum's network. Do you still use Ethereum's network, even with the high transactions fee? Or have you?
Yes, perfect question. And the high transaction fee, we actually were never using the public Ethereum network, because we realized that if we're going to be doing this for private companies, very likely those, even though we're not storing any personally identifiable information on the chain, which, by the way, one of our competitors, who shall not be named, does. Very bad idea. Once it's there, it can never be removed. So we were not storing publicly identifiable information there. However, just running even a private Ethereum network, you incur delays due to mining. So even with your own private nodes, you can turn it up to even a second per block. You end up not only incurring a bit of delay, but you're also generating a ton of data. So in our recent implementations, we're actually moving to a distributed ledger. Specifically, we're working with Amazon and using the Quantum Ledger database, QLDB. So it's still blockchain-based technology. We're still using blocks, hashing one block to the next, but it's more it's treated more like a database rather than a chain used for transactions in Ethereum.
And we still support Ethereum. So, if there are organizations out there who have implemented Ethereum and say we want to use our own, we still have that can be easily deployed.
Yeah, we're also partnered with IBM. So if you're using Hyperledger or if you just want to use a vanilla Ethereum blockchain, we support that as well. We've got a nice layer of abstraction in between.
Yep.
Fantastic. Now, gentlemen, there were a couple of more questions, but here's what I can tell you. I know because I know you all have to be somewhere else. I have to be actually at another session in the next 10 minutes as well. I do have a job, but sometimes I get called to moderate sessions, and I do it for the love of community and the great people that I get to talk to and the great questions that I get to field. Now, to our audience that's listening, I see a few more questions that come in around 51% attacks. I see questions around Bloksec for the financial sector and the healthcare sector. There have been some around digital passports, skinny IDs, digital vaccines, lots of new stuff. So here's what I can promise to the crowd. There should be another session of going passwordless. And this time around, we're going to focus on this aspect of digital IDs and the vaccination kind of passports and that conversation that's been going up. Mike and Ketan, you've definitely, I've done quite a few of these sessions. This has sparked a lot of interest. We will be in touch to do a part 2 of going passwordless and give it a bit of a COVID spin as well, because those questions have come up. To the audience, if you want to learn more, you want to see a demo of Bloksec on Cyber Exchange, reach out to Mike and Ketan. They'll be happy to set you up. I know my team is looking at some integrations through the Django framework. Some of my team members are online right now. Some are looking at some WordPress integrations. Lots of exciting things happening, especially here in the Durham region. And I highly, highly recommend that you stay in touch with Mike and Ketan. And I will also make sure that I will make sure that we have a second iteration of this session, because this has been truly, truly fascinating. Before I let you go, Ketan and Mike, I just want to thank you on behalf of the audience and for myself for really what was a very unique way of looking at passwords and getting us not just to look at the mental side of things, but also the technical realities on what happens when we create a password. Ketan, Mike, thank you very much. I'm going to ask you to stay on for another 30 seconds so we can just say a quick debrief in the green room. But to our audience, I'll actually be seeing you next week at the Enable AI Summit, where we'll be talking a lot about user behavior, about different elements around machine learning and AI components and the power of compute. Also happening this week is at the end of the week, I think on Friday, the first episode of Hack with Helen will be coming onto the Cyber Exchange platform. And I encourage all of you to watch it and also register for the Cyber Exchange Cyber Challenges statements, which are happening in July. If there's one thing that I learned from today's session, it is even the smallest step in the right direction can perhaps be the biggest step of your life. And this small step to trying to understand why do we need to be going away from passwords could make a major change in terms of your own behavior online, but also in terms of how your enterprise approaches access management. My name is Ali Hirji. Thank you for joining Tech Talks DC. Stay safe, stay healthy wherever you are, and thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Mike and Ketan. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Ali.
Thanks.